Comes on, that light means it's on.
Not,
Yeah.
oh,
You just have to
press
it for a
harder.
second. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There it is.
Okay, well, it's 4 o'clock, so we'll begin the meeting. Looks like we have a couple attendees from the virtual world. If we can start with a roll call, please.
Board Member Dyer?
Here.
Board Member Goodhue?
Here.
Board Member Gualtieri?
Here.
Board Member Pomeroy?
Here.
Chair Croman?
Here.
All are present.
Perfect, thank you. All right, will you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do we have any public appearances under the Brown Act? Hi.
Hi, good afternoon. I did it again. I do that all the time. I call every chairman a mayor.
That's very good.
So easy.
I'll take it.
You'll take it. Chair Croman, members of the HRB, and city staff, my name is Cindy Lloyd. I am going to beg your indulgence today. What I have to present to you takes longer than 3 minutes. I don't know if there are many others who want to follow me, but I have a letter that was written by Doug Schmitz to the Board of Trustees for the Harrison Memorial Library, and I read it there. I also have some papers to give you, which is the presentation that Robin Eshelman made at the same time, and she is Michael Murphy's great niece. So this has to do with the correct naming of the architect and designer of the Harrison Memorial Library. So if you wouldn't mind indulging me,
Please.
here it goes. Dear members of the board, in his commencement address at Yale University in June of 1962, President Kennedy commented, quote, "The great enemy of truth is the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. After 98 years of myth, it is time to accept the truth. Michael J. Murphy was the principal designer of the Harrison Memorial Library. The record is clear and concise, abundant and available, factual versus the reigning fiction. There is a certain cachet to a renowned architect's name being attached to the Harrison Memorial, but it isn't a tenant loyal to our history. Bernard Maybeck's fingerprints touch segments of the design. Michael Murphy's fist gripped it fast. One need to look no further than the Murphy scheme on the Sea Chapel Judson House in Pebble Beach to notice the identical twin mirror to the HML. I don't have a picture of that, but it is the same design of the balcony and the arch. The Judson House was drawn and constructed less than 1 year before the city of Carmel-by-the-Sea sought proposals for the to-be-built HML. But a century later, the written record tells us more, much more than just the solo singular photo of the Judson House. In response to the call for design proposals issued by the city in July 1926, 9 local Monterey Peninsula designers, architects, and builders responded. On Friday, the 20th of August, the board met at the home of trustee George Wood to review the submittals. There was no Brown Act in 1926. At the conclusion of the meeting, the trustees expressed agreement for a Spanish type of building, but none of the plans submitted were entirely satisfactory. 2 trustees suggested that a committee be appointed to, quote, confer with architect Maybeck in San Francisco, unquote. That proposal was accepted. Within a month following the meeting, Wood and a colleague, John Jordan, traveled to San Francisco and met with Maybeck at his office in the Lick Building. Of the 9 submitted proposals, they only took Murphy's to Maybeck. Upon returning to Carmel, a board meeting was called, and at that session, Jordan reported that Maybeck, quote, could not take entire charge of the library plans and construction supervision, but that he would advise and consult with Mr. Murphy at all stages of the proceedings. Note the reference to Murphy. The Maybeck archives at UC Berkeley contain the plans of the various elements that the architect developed for the HML project: the fireplace, the reading tables, the lighting, interior and exterior color schemes, and the garden wall. There are no preliminary plans or construction drawings of the Harrison in the archival collection. Documentation reveals that the two trustees, Wood and Jordan, took the Murphy plans on the trip to San Francisco between the August and September board meetings. Murphy wrote to Maybeck on November 8th of 1926 asking for the return, quote, to us of our original sketch of the proposed library to be built in Carmel, unquote. On November 23rd, 1926, the board met. In the minutes of the trustees' meeting, it states, quote, the plan of Mr. Murphy were shown, as was a large color sketch by Mr. Maybeck, end quote. Also at this meeting, Murphy, not Maybeck, was given authorization to proceed with developing, quote, the probable costs of the building in accordance with the plans submitted, and that these plans be accepted tentatively as a basis for estimate. Interestingly, Murphy, and not Maybeck, was tasked with developing the cost of the building in accordance with the plans submitted. Murphy would not be selected as the contractor for the library until 1927. If these were not Murphy's plans, then he held a status just like the others whose proposals were rejected in August. Jordan wrote Maybeck on the last day of December 1926, quote, I understand that you were to send us detailed drawings of the fireplace. Mr. Murphy now has reached the point where he needs it and has called upon me for it, end quote. The information in Jordan's correspondence is consistent with the Maybeck archives at UC Berkeley. Maybeck designed the fireplace to assimilate into the Murphy drawings. In August of 1927, during the construction of the library, Willard Bassett, owner-editor of the Carmel Symbol newspaper, proposed a series of questions to Murphy via an open letter in the publication about the library project, including inquiries regarding the roles of Murphy and Maybeck. Amongst the questions were, end quote, and who drew the plans for this building you are constructing? Bernard Maybeck, the noted architect, didn't, did he? They were drawn in your office, weren't they? Bernard Maybeck telling the Carmel City Council that after your draftsman drew them, he would, quote unquote, criticize them. Even in 1927, the Maybeck role in the design of the Harrison Memorial Library was being questioned. Murphy never responded to Bassett, yet editor Bassett had it correct. The role of Maybeck was to review the plans drawn by Murphy and to assimilate a fireplace, lighting, and a garden wall into the project. The promise of history is that eventually the truth prevails. May the High Court of Carmel history, that ultimate and eternal judge of your endeavors, find that this board, at this meeting, in this chamber, on this date, 98 years later, abolished the myth and advanced and advocated the truth. Michael J. Murphy designed the Ralph Chandler Harrison Memorial Library. Respectfully submitted, Douglas J. Smith, Carmel, California. Of interest is that the latest newsletter that has come from the Board of Trustees from the library indicates the highlight of the restorations. And it says, architectural preservation. The original 1928 Harrison Memorial Library, designed by Bernard Maybeck and built by M.J. Murphy, will be carefully and sensitively restored, ensuring the library retains its iconic aesthetics and historic charm. So that is incorrect. And both Robin Eshelman, Murphy's great niece, and I appeared before the Board of Trustees and presented our position that Maybeck designed it. And Ashley Wright afterwards talked to Robin and said, yes, that is correct, that they understand that Murphy did design the library. So the Murphy family would like to have a plaque put in the library designating that. There is a plaque that talks about Maybeck, but anyway, that is in process. And I just wanted you to know, since you are the keepers of Carmel's history. So thank you very much. Yes, copies of the letter and also the presentation that Robin gave at the Board of Trustees. And if any time you would like her to come and speak to you, she would. She hates public speaking, but she'd do it for the Murphy cause.
So I know the drawings I saw recently definitely had Murphy as consulting architect on the plans, but you're asserting that the plans were actually drawn in Murphy's office.
Yeah. Well, I thought more recently people had come around to the idea that Murphy did actually design it. That's the way I got it. But of course,
It's really
since the library board still is talking about Maybeck, this is a wonderful, clearance.
I think it's interesting that it's hard for me to believe he would just do the fireplace from San Francisco, but I'll look forward to seeing the letter and getting the background, because I think it's an interesting story to uncover.
Has the staff looked at this at all?
No, not yet.
Okay. Are you planning to?
I'll check the context statement, and if needed, we'll add it to the list of future updates, but no, this is the first time
Okay.
hearing of it as well.
Great, thank you.
And my understanding is that as they move forward with that restoration project, is that the first phase of that will be a more thorough historic analysis, which all this, I'm sure, will be reviewed and looked at, so that's exciting.
Very good.
Great.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for bringing this to
Thank
our
you,
attention,
Cindy.
Cindy.
Thanks so much. Any other public appearances? Okay, hearing none. Are there any announcements? Okay, hearing no announcements, let's move forward with the consent agenda. The first thing we have are the February 24 regular meeting minutes.
I have a small correction to the minutes, if I may be indulged here. On page 3, in the discussion of the Graney application, DS 24343, that was the Louise Murphy house, another Murphy. There was I think we need a correction to the last line of the paragraph before the motion was passed. And what it says is that with the condition that the addition, that was to the house, use shingle siding to resemble the historic home. That isn't what we did. What we did was to use shingle siding of a different size that was on the house. So we made the motion to, yes, do the addition in shingle, but differentiate it from the shingle that was on the house. And that's very key. It should not resemble, that's the whole point. It has to not resemble the house itself. So with that minor correction, if the board agrees, I would move the approval of the minutes of February 24th.
Any other issues with the minutes? Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes?
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes?
Board Member Gualtieri,
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, and then we have the certified local government annual report.
No staff report.
Okay.
It's available for questions.
Did anybody have questions on that? That was the 10-page item that we had in our packet.
I move do we have to approve it? Is that what we do here? Or just say we received it?
If you could move to approve it, and then staff will provide it to the state.
Okay. So I move that we approve the certified local government annual report as submitted by staff.
Second.
Perfect. Can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes?
Board Member Gualtieri,
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, and then we have some, under orders of business, we have some discussion about the historic context statement. We were provided with a letter from a member of our community, as well as some comments by the staff. Do you have any, are you going to make a report on that, or?
I do not have a presentation,
Okay.
but I'm available for questions on the staff report, and we also have our consultant available virtually.
Okay. Any questions about that issue? I mean, this is really about the period of significance versus how we couch things. Any thoughts or discussion on that? Those notes to the historic context statement?
I have some that was going to take me a minute to read, but I wanted to thank our former historic board member, Julie Went, for bringing up the question of determining which buildings qualify for listing in the inventory. And I was reminded when the National Historic Preservation Act was passed in 1966 by Congress, the basic rule of thumb has always been that a building has to be 50 years of age to have achieved its significance. And throughout the country, governments locally and the state have all used the similar criteria when we measure each building and look to see which one might have an important event in that building, or a person associated with the building, or a particular style that has achieved architectural significance. And so I do see a potential problem in the new historic context statement that the board may not have anticipated when we voted for the approval of it. I certainly didn't think it through myself. And it has to do with buildings that copy older styles of architecture, but weren't built in the original historical period when that style was prominent in the country. And I'll give you the example that has been used. The craftsman style went out of favor after 1930 and was replaced by newer styles following the Depression, the end of World War II, and onward. And so there's a concern that the new historic context statement that we just approved leaves the door open for new buildings that were constructed in the craftsman style, and whether they should be added to the inventory, the historic inventory, when they reach the elderly age of 50. So the problem that I see is that these buildings weren't built in that original time period of the historic craftsman period, and modern versions may mimic the style, but they're simply copies. So I think historic buildings do exist in a defined period of time, and if someone decides to copy a style at a later date, the new building doesn't really represent that original period of the style's significance. At least that's what I've learned in my 50-plus years in the field of historic preservation. I think the consultants who prepared our update didn't really intend to have a house that becomes 50 years old in the future and is a copy of an original Queen Anne or a Victorian or a Spanish eclectic or any of the other ranch styles that are in the context statement. But when we have put in an ending date of 1986, and half the styles that are listed in the context statement are in that period of 1986, then the original period of when those styles were prominent is lost or ignored. So I have an example that came up. You remember, all of you remember the earthquake we had in 1989, which severely hit the city of Santa Cruz. Pardon me, it did hit the city of Santa Cruz, that's true, and about 6 people died, so I shouldn't make light of it. But the city I'm reminded of is the town of Los Gatos over the hill. And what happened then, an entire neighborhood of Victorian houses was so badly damaged that the town really had no choice but to order their demolition. And the people who owned these houses were really, really upset, obviously. And so they prevailed upon the city fathers to approve a plan that allowed the homeowners to rebuild their houses exactly as they were originally designed, which means that now those same houses that were built are about 36 years old, and they look like they're a Victorian neighborhood. So should they be called historic? The State Office of Historic Preservation in 1989 strongly recommended to the town of Los Gatos to rethink their plans, but of course they went ahead anyway, and that was their choice and that was their right. So my advice, this is really a tricky question. I wouldn't like to think that 50 years from now we'd have a brand new craftsman house that someone would say, well, that's really very historic, because the period of significance for that craftsman house has disappeared at this point. And it may have other qualities. It may be outstanding for its design. And as our former board member, Thomas Hood, historic architect, said once, architecture is a continuum. And that's why every decade has a series of buildings that we all look to and admire and criticize and do whatever we do. But they represent their period of significance, not something from another time frame. I would like to think that maybe we could sponsor a panel. I was looking at our handbook. You know, everybody got that white handbook on the boards and commissions when we were appointed. And the handbook has a very interesting statement in it, and I'd just like to close with that. One of the board's primary duties is to inform and educate the citizens of Carmel concerning the architectural, cultural, and historical heritage of the city by publishing maps, newsletters, and pamphlets, and by holding programs and seminars. And many years ago when I was on the board, I can't even remember when, we did have a public workshop in this room. And I can't even recall what we were having the workshop about, but I know we did that. And I think that something on the order of, when does a style go out of style? When is it no longer considered? I mean, it may have craftsman influences, it may have Queen Anne influences and so forth, but is it really a craftsman? Is it really a Queen Anne? And I was picturing a workshop where we might have a public meeting and invite people like our fellow board member, Eric Dyer, who could represent the HRB. And there are other historic architects in town, like Brian Congleton, who gave a wonderful presentation at the Carmel Foundation last September when we were celebrating the historic house tour that celebrated Hugh Comstock's work with the Hansel and Gretel, who are now both 100 years old, I think. And also Thomas Hood, who was on this board. He would be a possible panelist. And I would hope that our chairman could lead the group. I'm volunteering his time. But I think something to just aid us over this bump in the road, if you will, because putting 1986 in the statement and having it sound like that has some meaning, to me, I've never seen that before, and I don't see the meaning at all. So I hope that we'll consider this in a future meeting, possibly have a simple workshop here that people can talk about this. But the context statement really, other than that, is excellent, and I wouldn't change it, but that has bothered me ever since we approved it at the meeting some months ago. So that's my take on the context statement. I'd welcome your comments if you have some.
I have to say, I almost consider style a separate designation from a good piece of architecture. There are a lot more things that go into a good building, something that makes it significant and worth preserving. And, you know, Gothic. I mean, Tudor. Those buildings were built and they were popular in many countries, but they weren't the original time period. But still, they were given these names, and everyone knows that this is not a green and green house or a Maybach house that we're talking about, but we're just putting a style on it, and a style may have been influencing the architect who did it. So I don't really see a hard and fast rule there.
I was just going to say, since I see Seth Bergstein online, I'd love to hear Seth's thoughts on all this, because I know we did talk about it, and maybe I'm sure Seth has knowledge about how other jurisdictions have handled similar things and what he thinks. Seth, here we go. Is it me?
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
We got you.
Excellent. All right, it's weird because this is my first public meeting outside of being with you guys face to face, and right now I haven't navigated Zoom in a while, so I can't see you on the screen, so I'm just going to talk. And I can mute and unmute, don't worry about that, it looks like. I have a bunch of questions, but I don't want to over-comment on this. The notion of stylistic end dates, and I think the focus here is on end dates, was never intended, number one, to equate to period of significance. It is the end date of when we see the style continuing through Carmel. And if we all can recall, since I've been in so many of these meetings, as you all have, there was a lot of discussion about, are there styles in Carmel that continue into the modern period? And we're also trying to answer a question that many HCSs don't do, and that is, what do we do with buildings from 66 to 86? What are the styles? Are they new styles? Are they revivalist styles? And as you all remember from our numerous meetings, we came to a consensus, I would say, as a group. It was not a push from my partner or myself to continue these end dates into this time period. We have, as you remember from, I think, the October meeting or the November meeting, when I was doing research in 2002, I found the original newspaper articles that talked about CV and Janik's survey of Carmel. And interestingly enough, having never read this before at the time, they mentioned basically the same styles that we mentioned that are continuing. And I can read a quote if you want, but I'm not going to do that again. That was done previously. And I don't want to delay the meeting. But this was a consensus kind of a decision. I'd argue as much led by the board and the staff as it was us. So having said that, my next question is, and I have solutions for the changes that are very simple, by the way. And I really appreciate Catherine Gualtieri's presentation. So we could always go that route, but procedurally, what happens now with you guys, with Planning Commission, with City Council? Are we going back in all over again? And then does that mean I've got to plan for a lot of time at meetings and whatnot to try to figure out what to do? I mean, we had a lot of opportunities for comments, and we had a lot of discussion on this, and this was not secret. So I don't, now we're all of a sudden going to start this position again of not completing this project. And that's a concern for me, as much for the taxpayers in Carmel as it is for just my work schedule and everything else. So I'll leave it at that, and I've done a lot of thinking about it. And I think there are good points, and we could certainly take the classical styles and bring them down to the normal end dates, which is essentially my solution. But anyway, let me start there, and let's just keep going with this. I hope Julie's here too to talk about this, so we can have an open discussion. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. I was just going to maybe engage a little bit in the discussion. But first, I want to say, I think, obviously the main bulk of the work, the historic context statement, has been approved and is enacted. So I think that's, with that being said, what we're talking about kind of is a nuanced thing, which I think we have time to review and go over. But I think it's an interesting discussion in general. I think, speaking on behalf of the people that were involved with that process, and I think Seth, would corroborate this is that, the styles that we were reviewing, we looked at, okay, could there be someone, obviously there's craftsmen being done more recently, contemporary craftsmen, you might say. That could be really nice pieces of architecture. Would those be eligible? And so I think we left that open-ended so that we could be open to pieces of architecture that were just really done well in an historic style. That was our thought process. And there's certainly styles that were placed through 1986 where I think you have to say, you would want to continue almost till the present. There's certainly contemporary organic style architecture that's being done. You could say certainly the Bay Region modern style, there's still being thoughtful ones being done that would be considered. I guess the Bay Region modern style is an interesting one because it's such a wonderful continuum. The phrase started with actually Bernard Maybeck as Bay Region tradition, the first Bay Area tradition, and then it graduated into mid-century modern buildings of people like William Worcester, who has several homes in Carmel, and that's usually considered the second Bay Area tradition.
What about Charles Moore?
And Charles Moore is the third tradition. So that comes out of the Sea Ranch tradition. I think you can throw in people like George Brockhofflow and people like that. Architects like Mickey Munig and things would be part of the organic tradition. So you can see that continuum very clearly. I guess there is questions about these older historic styles. I could even see Spanish eclectic as something, especially if done in a more modern way. Maybe you couldn't categorize it as a Bay Region modern house. It could be a modern Mediterranean or something. But I think the problem with this a little bit comes down to the fact that one of the main criteria we put something or can put something on the inventory is it being a good example of a recognized style. And so the historic context statement was an attempt to name those styles and to show the character defining elements of those styles. And I just am curious, Seth, continuing the conversation, what you've seen in other jurisdictions and how they've handled it. Go ahead, Sarah. In similar ones. He has his hand up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Some historic context statements will give classic, let's take the arts and crafts because that was the subject of the letter. And as you all know from the meetings, an absolute passion of mine. I have 100 books on the subject. Typical arts and crafts stylistic time period. If you go in England, it's earlier, but the United States, well, when is Keeler building those houses? So it's 1898, and then in the Bay Area, migrates to Southern California, carries on through in between. So the heyday might be, 1895 to 1925, 1930. Arguable whether 30s stucco bungalows are arts and crafts or not. I would argue they probably are, but they're more standardized versions. But you take that style, and the HCS would normally give you that time period. So I can understand the confusion, especially from someone knowledgeable like Julie, that, well, wait a minute, that's the time period. What are they talking about in 1986? It doesn't make any sense. So again, I totally note the comment. I think it's an interesting comment, but so some context statements will do that. But what we're not quite seeing here is that the date ranges we're giving are the dates that the styles are prolific. They're not the POS or the period of significance of the styles, right? The period of significance is defined as a time period in which the resource gains significance, right? So it's A, B, or C, 1, 2, or 3. In the case of what we're talking about a C3, so an architectural example of a style. So the POS would be the date of construction, basically, unless there was an early addition, right, that was considered, by the same architect or something. But basically, that's the POS. So the two other things to consider, number one being that the HCS was not about, those date ranges were not what the POS of a building was. We're going to do a phase one on everything in Carmel every time. So if someone decides they want to list a building, grab a Mills Act from a 1978 Craftsman, we'll call it, and say we're going to list it, well, it has to go through a phase one, and it has to go, and we have to determine a period of significance, and we have to know everything about it. And you guys got to review it, and other people do, and the staff does. So, you know, it's always going through a phase one anyway. So that's one thing I also want to bring up. But anyway, Eric, to answer your question, sorry, is that it varies. I went back and looked at the Pacific Grove Historic Context Statement this week, and you know, they have time periods that expand beyond their themes. You know, and I've always used that as a model because I work with it a lot in my company, and it's been a useful document. So it's not a hard and set rule, and I'm sure you can find other ones that don't do that. I think it's unusual a bit to carry these styles to the end dates we did. Carmel is a very unusual and interesting place for so many million reasons, as we all know. So in that sense, I would say it's a little different. We've explained that pretty well in that final theme, but maybe we could maybe explain that better. But again, I'll say we all kind of came about with this. I'm very malleable on what to do. It's just the procedures of it, with it being gone through city council and all that. So that'll be it for right now. Sorry, guys.
And does anyone have any issues with whether there'd be something to trip us up legally in terms of historic preservation law, let's say in 40 years or something, or something built in 1986 as a craftsman, and we decide, or that future, I don't think it'd be we or me, but the future HRB decides a craftsman from 1986 is deserved to be put on the inventory. Let's hypothetically say the owner doesn't want to do that, and would there be any legal issue that anyone can see in terms of precedent of whether that could be the HRB could in fact do that in a way that would be consistent with all the laws, and likely that ruling would stand? Or is it, I'm just curious because I don't know the answer to that. And maybe that's not I don't know if Seth can answer that either, but or staff does. Go ahead.
One thing I forgot to mention, guys, was I'm losing my train of thought, but Catherine Gualtieri's comment about the 50-year rule is very interesting. I mean, there's a conflict here, and it's conflict about ordinances. None of us probably had a part in writing, but this 50-year rule is very, very accepted throughout every place I work in California. And then we have this element of the ordinance that says, well, it could be a good example of a style. I would say that might be a bigger problem than what we're dealing with is if you cut it off at 50 years, you obviate some of the concerns we have right now. Anyway, sorry, forgot to mention that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just remembering that the earlier updates to the context statement that were done in the past, and there were 2 or 3 of them, they had an end date of 1940.
For craftsmen.
How did they come up with that? How did they decide 1940 was the answer, and now we're deciding 1986 is the answer?
Well, this brings up somewhat a problem of consistency, right? I mean, literally any style could be said, I mean, someone could build that kind of style today. And yet, there's quite a few styles, there are end dates in the context statement.
Right. But the 50-year rule would be the guidance that we could use.
Mm-hmm. But I'm just trying to think about the consistency within the context statement itself.
We do still use 50
Right.
years.
Yeah,
right.
The only reason the context statement has kind of gotten ahead of our 50-year date is because we were given a grant to do a 20-year extension, and it just so happened.
That's
old
the
document
answer.
ended in 1966.
Okay.
So that put us at 1986, and it seemed like a logical stopping point as well, because that's when
You've hit
Mr.
the-
Eastwood
you
was elected.
hit
So
the
it was
target.
kind of like, let's stop it here. The next edition can pick up in the Eastwood years.
I think that's a good answer, Catherine, because that is, I think, what's confusing to people who have dealt with the 50-year rule, and then all of a sudden it goes up to 86. I mean, we could almost leave it blank and just have the beginning and no end, just have a dash.
Well, I think we wrestled with the 1986 date a lot previously, and I don't think anyone probably thinks that that's the perfect date, but it's better than other dates that we came up with. And Catherine, thanks for sharing that information as well.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
And then when the context statement is updated, it's supposed to be every 5 years, then it goes to 91 or something like that, I suppose. But or depending on when we actually do it. But yeah, I mean, for example, if someone did a Queen Anne style today, why would that? I mean, if that was done really well, what would be the difference of that and a storybook, which is for some reason gone to 1986? I don't see a difference. So that's just a issue of consistency within the document. But I would just go back to, I think this is we have an approved updated context statement. This isn't about opening a huge can of worms, but it's something to maybe to think about and continue the discussion about, because I think, you could make the argument storybook style has had its day, and that's, as with Carmel vernacular, that's kind of ended, right?
Well, I'm reminded of the discussion that went all the way up to the city council, I believe, maybe not, maybe just to the planning commission, with the, I don't want to misuse the term, but the pasting of styles on the pit buildings, where you had Tudor, Mediterranean. I mean, I don't know if they had any Queen Anne's, but I mean, that's what that was. That is a building that, how will we look at that in 50 years? That's my question. I think these are all good things to discuss and keep in our minds. And I don't recommend we do a whole lot right now, but I think that it's good for us well, it was good for me because I was coming at it from I wasn't here that long, and I didn't really get the gist of what was going on with the 1986 end date, but
Yeah,
someone has told me now.
Yeah.
I really get it.
Well, and I think we should thank Ms. Wendt for bringing that up. It's a
Yes.
thought-provoking issue. I also think that it's a good example of getting comments in a timely fashion. We've been working on the historic context statement for a long time. It's easier and it's not exclusive. Certainly she has the right to do this, as does anyone else, and I appreciate her doing this now versus never. But I mean, it is a good reminder to all of us and to our community that, as we work on a project, it's much easier and much better to get the comments in while you're working on that project versus after it's about to be published. And I think that's something that we should think about as well. We should encourage our community to do that.
Can we put a little addendum or afterward or something into it explaining that?
I think it's already passed and approved, so I think we would have to.
It's been approved.
And we'd have to, I just would also like to say, if we decided to make a change to what was already approved, I would really suggest we take our time and be very, very thoughtful and certainly not present anything to the city council half-baked, because, I think it is a thorough document. Again, I just want to reiterate the rationale for what was done, which was simply that these styles are continuing to be built in the city, certainly through 1986, and the fact that that an exceptional piece of architecture could have been one of them. That was at least it was my rationale for what was, why we would include it all the way to 1986. But I think these are definitely worthy issues. The other thing I wanted to just mention is I feel a little uncomfortable and saddened by the letter that Julie wrote after reading the staff report. I should say that I did have a short conversation with Julie prior to the issuance of the staff report, so that wasn't part of the discussion. But I have not since then, and I'm just saddened that she was not here to really discuss these. And from her letter, she expressed why, because she felt that would be a distraction. But nevertheless, I can just say in terms of, I assume Catherine wrote the staff report, that I didn't think it was, I didn't take it as an assault on Julie or an insult to Julie. I saw it as a way of just making an argument of why the historic context statement was pursued and written the way it was. So that, I don't know if you want to address that at all, but yeah, I didn't take it the way Julie did. I'm sure she felt that way, and I'm happy to talk to her about it. But I would like to, if we continue this discussion, be great to have her a part of it and have this very open and transparent.
Yeah, and I think as we wrap this up too, it's important to note that historic context statement is a living document. It's not published and then done for perpetuity. So, I mean, certainly in the future there are opportunities to adjust and add or retract or whatever some additional comments. So I think at the end of the day, I think it was a great product by the staff, by the consultants. Eric, I know you had a big part to play in that. So I think we took a kind of outdated document and really brought it up into the modern era, not past 1986, but into the modern era. So thanks to everybody for doing that. Any final comments on this issue?
I don't know, I just have to say, I think that style is just one aspect of making a building significant. And you can label it anything you want, but if it's a good building, if it meets the standards, I think it's whatever style you call it, I think it needs to be listed.
And that's that's the tricky part of it, right? Because in the historic preservation law, so much of it is wrapped up into the definitions within the historic context statement. And that's why they're so important, because whether it's a good piece of architecture, based on materiality and proportion and all these things we know are a part of architecture, those are a little bit harder to
If it has the
objectify and within
standards, all of those things are the standards.
And I think the staff.
Well, what are the standards? The standards aren't really written down except to say that you have character to define the elements of the style.
I think there was a good comment from the staff too in their report. They talked about, these specific items are specific to an individual resource, not a style. So there's certainly some room for interpretation.
Yeah, there's always that, correct, Catherine? I mean, there in terms of making a building significant, there's I forget maybe you could help me with the exact specific wording of that, but if it's, for example, not necessarily identifiable style, it can still be considered a good, significant piece of architecture under criteria 3. No?
Well, there are a lot of other listings under standards, so it's not just, it doesn't really say anything about style there.
What do you mean by standards?
The Secretary of Interior standards.
But that's usually associated with how we deal with an historic resource, right? Not why you put it on a.
Well, I know, but I'm talking about style as it relates. I think it's almost a footnote.
I totally understand what you're saying, but in terms of the actual documents and the legal, I don't see it written like that. Do you, Catherine? Do you know what I'm saying?
What I would say is that I think there are national standards that Carmel, as a certified local government, has agreed to accept. I think the state has been generous with us in giving us quite a bit of money for these grants, and we want the work done. And I don't think we should veer off into something about the heyday of something like that and not keep our minds on the standards. Maybe that's what
Exactly, that's what I'm
Esther is talking about. We have to follow those standards, and we can't say, well, Carmel is so unique it doesn't have to. You won't be successful if that's the attitude. Then I just feel that this is a unique place and we want to protect it. And I think we're all here for that reason. But I thank the staff for what it's done. I think Seth and Kent did a great job. And I think we should just move forward, but this has been a good discussion.
Absolutely. Okay. Any further discussion? All right, let's move on to public hearings for DS 24351 Del Mar Carmel LLC.
Good afternoon. DS 24351 Del Mar Carmel LLC. This is a design study for the review of proposed changes to the George Graft House located on Scenic. It was designed by M.J. Murphy for George Kraft in 29 and was found to be significant under criteria 3. It's a Spanish eclectic style house and it was added to the inventory in 99. Character defining features is 3 stories, the L shape, the stucco and barrel tiles that is typical on the Spanish eclectic style. It has some significant chimneys and some interesting polygonal towers. For the standards, we have the list on the left of the 10 standards. For this project, it's found to be consistent with 1, 2, 9, and 10, and the rest are not applicable. So a description of the project, there's the addition of 3 new skylights, 2 in the kitchen and 1 in the upstairs bathroom. The addition, or the swapping of a existing non-historic window for that would match the other non-original French doors. A 1-foot 9-inch mineral glass windbreak that would be at the front of the property on an existing non-original wall, and the replacement / addition of exterior lights on the east, north, and south elevations. So we'll look at the project piece by piece. For the 3 skylights, you can see here from the roof plan the proposed skylights for the bathroom and the kitchen. Per Meg's, our historic consultant's Phase 2 report, they're inconspicuous and not visible from the public right of way. With regards to the window, you can see the highlighted snippets of the elevation and the existing door there that is next to the windows. The new French doors are going to match the existing non-original French doors. And the existing window is low to the ground and of a similar size, so it won't be a large change and it won't be duplicating the existing fenestrations, so there's no worry about false history for the additions or the replacement. For the mineral glass windbreak, can be a little hard to see, so I highlighted it up. You can see above the wall right there. It's determined that it will be, because of the design of the windbreak itself, it'll be very translucent and won't actually block any view of historic features of the property or landscape. And finally, the lighting. As you can see here, these lights will be replaced with these lights with the metal casing around them and shielded lights that meet our design standards and fit in with the style of the house, while not, again, attempting to be falsely viewed as historical. With that, we're recommending a resolution to adopt an issued determination of consistency for the George Graft House on Scenic Avenue. I'm here for any questions.
Any questions for Jacob before we open up to the owner's representative? Okay, if not, we'll open it up to public comment. You have anything you'd like to share with us?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Miller. I represent the project as the architect. I concur with staff's analysis and really have nothing more to add to that.
Any questions from the board? Okay, thanks so much.
I have a question. Is that caged looking light, is that historic? Does that look historic?
No, no, that's clearly not what would have been on the building originally. And all the lights have been replaced. Obviously, none of the exterior lights are historic. That's more of a modern light fixture.
Is it compatible with the architecture of the building?
I think it's consistent with the idea that we're not trying to make the lighting look like it was original to the building. So,
In the Phase 2 report from Meg, she stated she thought it was compatible with the architecture, and staff concurs with her assessment as well.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. Any discussion on this property? Pretty cut and dry. Do we have a motion?
Okay, I'll go ahead and move that the board issue a determination of consistency with the Secretary's Chair of Standards for the modification of this historic Spanish eclectic style house, DS 24351.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay. Can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes?
Board Member Gualtieri,
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Thank you.
Good luck.
And do we have a director's report?
First, thanks to our two secretaries this evening, Shelby and Juanita. And then I also wanted to give a tardy introduction to Anna Jeanette, our new Planning and Building Director, who was with us last month. We're very happy to have her, and I'm sure after the meeting, she'd love to meet all of you individually. We do have a couple meetings next week. The council is meeting on March 24th to discuss capital improvement projects and a budget forecast. And then on March 27th, it'll be a special city council meeting about the police building project. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Any proposed agenda items? I would like to propose that going forward, we list the next meeting's date at the end of our
Certainly.
agenda.
Certainly.
Yep. Any other issues? Okay. Hearing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for your time.